My name's Leo and I'm a boat builder and a sailor, and I'm on a mission to rebuild and restore this 110-year-old classic sailing yacht, Tallyho. So we're still doing a lot of bronze work, making the floors and the knees for the boat, and in this episode we're going to be going back to the foundry and looking more closely at the actual packing of the flasks, the making of the moulds and the pouring of the bronze. Now we cast all the smaller floors first of all, and after we'd done them all we realised that we didn't have a big enough flask to cast the very big floors. And this is one of the larger patterns, so you can see it's really quite big. And so before we could cast these bigger floors we actually had to make a bigger flask to put them in. The flask itself is quite a bit of work because it's got to have a welded frame to keep it stable, especially at this size, and various pins and so on to hold the two pieces of it together. But once that was done we were able to start casting these bigger floors, but we were still having some trouble getting these moulds packed properly. So we changed our approach a bit and we started moulding these floors with three pieces. So as well as the cope and the drag, which is the two pieces of the mould above and below the piece, we also had a core piece, so another third piece in the middle. But at this point a lot of the guys who had been helping me had to leave, and I had a few more people come in to help, which did mean that they had to learn a lot of the process from scratch. So the guys did have a bit of trouble with the first one they did, and you'll see that in the video. It is a bit disheartening when you do spend a lot of time packing one of these and then you go to hoist it and it all just comes tumbling out and all that work has to be redone. But it is a learning process, and I do find it really interesting to sort of discover the tricks to make this go more smoothly and just become more and more familiar with a very traditional process.
Hey, my name's Will. I'm from Sequim and known Leo since about 2017. I grew up in Sequim, grew up sailing, just a little dinghy around. But yeah, I've always been kind of into boats and have been looking at Leo's project for a while and thinking about volunteering, and it's fun to get in on the other end of things and learn about how a boat is built. And so far it's very difficult. All right.
Always a fun challenge on the first one. So if you feel here, cement up there, there's definitely, well, yeah, there's definitely a layer.
Yeah.
So they're not clinging together.
Right.
So we're overpacked in a line that just allowed that to separate. The box flexes it all because it broke real clean all the way along where the cleat is.
Right. After the guys packed this pattern the first time and unfortunately had all the sand fall out of the cope when they lifted it off, they repacked it the next day, and that time they were able to take it all apart more successfully. Although to get the core out, Pete had to really whack the flask with a big hammer because the core, the central bit, was supposed to just fall out, but it was just getting a little bit stuck there. And that was a bit nerve-wracking because we were all hoping and praying that the rest of the sand wouldn't fall out with the core when it finally went. Finally, once the pattern was taken out and the mould was put back together, we were able to pour the floor, which is always a mesmerizing process, and we came out with a really good result.
My name is Pete Langley. I'm one of the co-owners of Townsend Foundry along with my wife Kathy. Essentially we started in the early 80s, so almost 40 years now of producing castings as Townsend Foundry. One of the things that intrigued me was the history and the fact that the original one started in 1883, and so we restarted almost 100 years later from the original. Lots of different products, whether it's a dolphin on a taffrail to other products from stanchions and gimbaled stoves that have gone to numerous different small vessels around the country. So now we're up in the pattern loft where we actually have a pattern shop. The product line varies from very custom one-off pieces to ones that we're going to do 250 or more in a run. Katie's here working on a few things, and will be great to see the next product come out. So here we're in the pattern storage area. We've got close to 6,000 pieces in this room, which are all either handmade wood pieces, carved and or match plates, production tooling for various pieces that we make. This is the match plate pattern for the Schooner Columbia wheel that we did. Here we are in the grinding room. Rough castings get, after they're broken out, brought back, sandblasted, cleaned, and eventually ground and polished to a very high bright finish. Not only do we collect all the cutoff and gates, but we collect every bit of grinding dust that we produce, and it's all recycled. We're here in the machine shop, and this is where most of the product comes to get drilled, tapped, countersunk, threaded. This is typically Daniel's domain, and he's done a real good job. Started with us many years ago as a young lad just pushing a broom, so he's come a long way, and skills have really progressed.
Oh, we're on?
Yeah.
Rolling. I'm gonna start the first hole, fastening hole in the floor. What? I'm gonna start fastening the floors, the bronze floors that we've all been working on, or everyone else besides me. We're gonna start boring out the keel, the floor and the keel, to get a couple bolts through. So I got to go through this bronze and then about 10 or 12 inches of Purple Heart, at least in this spot. Some longer bolts in other spots, but yeah. The magical gasket maker.
I want to know if whoever sent you this said it was a puzzle, because I think it's a piece of art that you just decided was a puzzle. I don't think it comes apart. But maybe the puzzle is how long will it take Leo to figure out that this thing doesn't come apart? Will you film me taking it apart and pretend that I just figured it out?
Sure. I'll just also include this clip.
Damn it.
I think if you tilt it like a certain way, then they'll come apart. What the hell? It's like it shakes in 4 directions.
I'm thinking about cutting it in half with the Sawzall.
No.
Just give it a twirl.
David and Leo and me were having lunch and we were all trying to figure out how it comes apart. And Leo and David had kind of figured, they're like, oh, there's probably like 4 pins in there. They need to like shoot out to the outside. And Leo chucked it to David, who was sitting here, and it like spun in the air, and David caught it, and it like came. That's awesome.
So here behind me, we actually have one of the larger floors, the wider floors, finished and installed in the boat. And you can see why it's wider. It's spanning a larger gap as the centerline comes up a little bit higher. And some of these underneath where I'm sitting now will be wider still. Now the main difference between these wide ones and the other ones we've been doing, of course, we happen to use that larger flask, and although it may look just a little bit larger than the other ones, it's a lot more work. The bigger volume just means there's a lot more sand has to go into it. It's very labor intensive, and so these wider ones, although there's only a few left, they are taking a bit longer. But Pete has been putting them into the boat and boarding them through the centerline, and it's really nice to see them here doing their job and finished inside the boat. Now, while all this casting has been going on down at the foundry, we've been very busy up here as well. There's been a lot of work going on, a lot of grinding to fit the floors and the hanging knees, a lot of sanding and polishing to get them finished, and of course then getting them bolted through the centerline. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about the fitting of the hanging knees and so on in this episode, but we will be looking at that later on when we get a few more in. Right now, the next job for me to do is to make the final patterns for this round of casting, which are the patterns for the breast hooks. The brackets which hold together the forward ends of the stringers here and the beam shelves up above. So the breast hook patterns are now finished, which is great because it means that all the patterns are now finished, and when these are finally cast and finished in bronze, they will be bolted through the stringer, and then there'll be one big bolt from the front here going all the way through the stem. So this bracket and the main breast hook up above in the beam shelf will really tie the forward end of the boat together, because there's no floors this far forward tying the frames to the centerline. So this is going to do that job, and it'll give a lot of strength to the bow of the boat. While we're up here, I can show you how one of these hanging patterns fits. It goes about there. A few of these are actually already finished, but we're going to wait till next episode to really go into that, because hopefully we can get a few more done by then and show them in the boat.
Hey, this is Will. So lately my working day has gone something like I show up, spend about my first hour trying to get this little devil apart. Everything else seems pretty easy after that, but I feel like everybody else has solved it, but they won't show me how, and I'm getting really frustrated.
Ready? Ta-da!
A little bit of the leaning tower pizza, but that's all right. Screw goes in.
When I was cutting this prop aperture in the last video, I forgot to explain what this second hole is, and a few people were wondering. This hole is just a hole for another bolt that holds the whole stern assembly together. Like all the centerline bolts, it's a bronze bolt that goes from the outside of the centerline to the inside, and although I drilled this hole when I put the rest of the bolts in, I never drove this bolt through because I knew I would later on have to cut the prop aperture out here, and so the bolt would have been too long and would have had to come out again. So having cut the aperture last week, I then counterbored this hole for the nut and washer, and now I just need to drive through this bolt, the final structural centerline bolt, apart from the floors and the keel bolts. Now, casting bronze is very time consuming, very labor intensive and very expensive, as I found out, but I do think the result that we're getting is going to be the best of the best, and although it's a bit of a struggle now, hopefully in a few years looking back on this it will all seem very much worth it. I hope it is the right thing to do for the boat, and I hope that you guys aren't getting too bored with the casting. I know there are faster ways of doing this, but I did think it was important to try and replicate the original design as best as possible, unless there was a really good reason not to, and this is the best way that I was able to see of doing that. I'm also really happy to be supporting the Port Townsend foundry. The traditional process which they use is something that I think should be kept alive and passed on, and they employ a lot of younger people and are really encouraging them and promoting them to learn the trade. I do want to say a really extra big thank you this week to all you guys out there, everyone that's watching the channel, the amazing community that has just sprung up around this project. It's really inspiring for me, and it really does keep me going when things are tough. I just feel very, very grateful and lucky to be able to do this, so thank you. I'd also like to thank everyone who sent me messages or emails giving their support, encouragement, advice, offering their help in various ways. I really do appreciate those, and I really try and read and respond to them all. I know I do miss some of them because it's just so busy here. It's very hard to keep up with all the correspondence, and so if I haven't responded to you, I apologise for that. And also everyone who sent me things from my wish list, it's really, really useful. I often don't receive the information on who sent me these things, which means I don't know where it's come from and I can't say my thanks. But whether or not I am able to respond and thank you, I do really, really appreciate that. So big thanks to all you guys. And we'll see you all next time. Cheers.